No, I was just saying that we'll start with some prayers, and then those who wish to do the prayers can do so. Those who don't wish to can simply meditate, and then we'll do a little bit of meditation and generating a positive motivation to begin the session tonight. So I think the prayers will be shown up on the screen. Okay. So the first is refuge in bodhicitta, taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the three jewels, and then generating this altruistic attitude of wanting to benefit all living beings and wanting to develop our potential for awakening, for enlightenment, so that we can help all living beings reach enlightenment as well. So that's the basic idea. We do this 3 times. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence, and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniyataya. And then the mantra of the Buddha, let's do that 3 times and feel that you're connecting with the Buddha, his wisdom, compassion, love, and feel his energy, his blessings flowing into you, helping awaken your own Buddha nature, your potential to attain awakening. Taya ta om mune maha Taya ta om mune maha Taya ta om mune maha So just sit quietly and Let your body be as relaxed as possible. Some of you may have been working today and might be some stress, some tension that's built up in your body. So if there is any of that, imagine that it melts, flows out of you, disappears, leaving your body feeling as light and free of tension as possible. And let your mind relax. If there are any thoughts in your mind about other times, other places, like maybe you're still thinking about something that happened today or something you're going to do tomorrow. So any thoughts of the past or the future, just put them aside for now. Let your mind be right here in this present place and this present moment. Now let's think about why we're here. We always have some reason, some motivation for the things that we do. And our teachers say it's really important to try to have a positive motivation, a beneficial motivation for the things that we do, especially when it comes to Dharma things, learning Dharma, meditating, and so on. So the very best motivation that we could have is what's called bodhicitta, which is aspiring to become enlightened or awakened so that we can help all other living beings become free of suffering and achieve happiness and eventually achieve enlightenment as well. So some of you are familiar with that state of mind and are comfortable with it. So bring that into your mind as your reason for being here. Anyone who's not so familiar or comfortable with bodhicitta, try to at least have an altruistic attitude, meaning wishing to help others, wanting to be as beneficial to others as possible and not harm others, and wanting to live your life in that way. So if you're comfortable with that, you could think, I would like to learn something here tonight that will help me to be more helpful to others in my life and less likely to harm others or cause problems to others. Okay, so we'll do some more meditation later. Let's start looking at the topic for tonight. So I've made some slides. This topic is somewhat complicated and maybe a little technical as well. So it can be helpful to have some words up there on the screen to look at. So the topic I'm going to be doing tonight and the next 2 Tuesdays is called the Four Establishments of Mindfulness. And this is not so well known in Tibetan Buddhism, but it is very much practiced in the Theravada tradition. That's the tradition of Buddhism that is practiced in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Burma, Sri Lanka, and so on. And so some people have the idea that, oh, it's just a Theravada practice. It's just something that they do, but not something that we do in our tradition. And this is actually a mistake, a misunderstanding. How do I get my, okay. It is something that we need to practice in our tradition, which is the Mahayana tradition. This is the tradition that goes to enlightenment. Those who want to follow the bodhisattva's path and reach enlightenment and help all living beings. This is the Mahayana tradition. So it is something that those on the bodhisattva path have to practice. And but there's not that much information in our tradition, with a few exceptions. So one exception is a book that some of you may be familiar with, the series of books that Venerable Thupten Chodron is putting together. It's called The Library of Wisdom and Compassion. And it's actually the Dalai Lama's teachings, mainly the Dalai Lama's teachings on the path to enlightenment. And she's been editing them and also bringing in material from other traditions, the Pali tradition and also the Chinese tradition. So, so far there's been 8 of these books published. The 9th one is on its way. The 10th one is still being written. So it's quite like an encyclopedia. Anyway, in the 4th volume of that series, which is called Following in the Buddha's Footsteps, there's information about the 4 establishments of mindfulness. So anyone who's interested in that topic, I really recommend that. And in there, the Dalai Lama says that he really encourages people in the Tibetan tradition to do these practices. He says it's a real shame that not many people are doing it. We should be doing it, and he wants people to do it more. And one of the comments he makes, he says, nowadays, most non-Tibetans, which includes us, receive teachings on the Lamrim, the path to enlightenment, and after some contemplation of Lamrim topics, receive tantric empowerments or permissions and make tantric sadhanas their daily practice. So kind of, in other words, we quickly get into tantric practice and then spend most of our time doing that. And then he says, after a while, some people begin to feel that their practice isn't advancing. Some people feel like they're not really getting anywhere in their practice. And I believe one remedy to this is to spend more time contemplating Lamrim topics and meditating on the 4 establishments of mindfulness before entering Tantra. And in fact, I'm living now in a monastery in Eastern Washington, Sravasti Abbey, and every winter they do a 3-month retreat in silence and doing about 5 sessions of meditation a day. And this past winter, they focused on this practice. So the residents were meditating on these 4 establishments of mindfulness 5 times a day, and everybody was free to go at their own pace. they could, because there's many different practices within this, many different kinds of meditation. So each person could decide what they wanted to focus on and how to spend their time. And just last week, we finished the retreat, and then we had we sat in a circle and people shared something that they learned from the retreat that they found valuable. And everybody had some really valuable things to say. Some people gained more insight into this particular practice, for example, the nature of the body, and others talked about how they could see their delusions, like, self-centeredness, anger, attachment, and so on, and really saw clearly that they need to work on those things. And so I think everybody found it very, very beneficial, very valuable to spend so much time focusing on this particular topic. So it's a vast topic, a huge topic. I'm not going to be able to talk about everything in just 3 sessions. I'm going to have to just pick and choose a few things that I hope will give you a taste and what's that word? What do you eat before a meal? Hors d'oeuvre, yeah. So to kind of arouse your interest in this practice, so you will look into it more. Okay, so let's first look at mindfulness. This term mindfulness, it's very well known these days. There's a lot of talk about mindfulness and a lot of apps that people can use to practice mindfulness. Books, magazines, and of course seminars and so on to learn about mindfulness. But there's also different views about mindfulness. What exactly is mindfulness? So in the Tibetan tradition, this is the explanation of mindfulness. It's a mental factor, one aspect of the mind. And it has 3 features. The first is that its object, there's always an object that is being looked at or that you're mindful of. And the object is something familiar, something we've already noticed, experienced, not a totally new object, it's something familiar. And the second feature is that the mind doesn't forget the object. So it's able to stay on the object for some period of time, hopefully longer and longer periods of time the more you practice. So it stays on the object without wandering elsewhere. And then the function of mindfulness is to prevent distraction, to stop the mind from going elsewhere. So to give an example, we've probably all attempted to meditate on the breath. And I say attempted because even though it's a kind of relatively simple, basic practice, but when we try to do it, it's often very difficult to keep our mind focused on the breath. But anyway, in that practice, we sit down and calm our body, calm our mind, and then we decide to focus on the breathing coming in and going out. So the breath is a familiar object. I mean, we're breathing all the time. We're not always aware of our breathing, but it's definitely happening all the time, otherwise we'd be dead. So it's something we are familiar with. And mindfulness is when we're able to stay focused on the breath, even just for a few seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, or however long you're able to do so. So as long as our mind is focused, attentive to the breath, that means mindfulness is there. Mindfulness is doing its job. It's present, and it's mindfulness that enables the mind to stay focused on the breath without thinking of something else. But eventually, sooner or later, our mind does wander away, and we start thinking about what we're going to cook for dinner, or the movie we saw last night, or something that happened during the day. You know that one, right? So other thoughts pop up, and our mind wanders away from the breath and gets caught up in that other thought. So when that happens, that means mindfulness has kind of collapsed or temporarily disappeared. And hopefully before too long, we'll realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to be thinking about that. I'm supposed to be watching the breath. So then we pull the mind back to the breath and again, stay on the breathing, coming in and going out. So whenever our mind is on the breath or whatever object you're meditating on, whatever the object is, whenever your mind is on that object rather than else, doing something else, that means mindfulness is there. Mindfulness is present and functioning, doing its job. So it's really important in meditation. It plays a very, very important role in meditation, because if we can't keep our mind focused on our object, then there's no concentration and we won't be able to really gain the benefit of meditation. So it's crucial for success in meditation. But it's also important in our life. It's something we all have in our life, even people who don't meditate. It enables us to remember to show up for work. You know, if you have a job and you're supposed to show up at a certain time, okay, provided you remember that and don't forget, and you do show up at that time, then that's mindfulness playing that role. Or other responsibilities that you may have, taking care of a child or parent or a sick friend or whatever. So we have certain responsibilities, certain commitments that we have taken on and we want to fulfill. So mindfulness enables us to remember those things and not forget them. I mean, sometimes we do forget, unfortunately, but we try to remember and we try to show up for our responsibilities. And then for those of us on the spiritual path, practicing Dharma, mindfulness is also very important to remember what is positive or constructive actions and what is our non-virtuous or negative actions, like killing, for example. That's like the first precept when you start practicing Buddhism. You really try to be mindful of other beings, that they want to be happy just like us. They don't want to suffer. And so we really try not to do anything that would harm them. So keeping that in mind, remembering that, to not kill, especially if you've taken the vow, the precept to not kill, you need to keep that in mind. And then even in a situation where, you know, a mosquito lands on your arm or there's a bug crawling across, and maybe you would have in the past killed that insect, but now you remember, no, I'm not going to do that. I've taken the precept. That being doesn't want to suffer, whatever enables you to remember that and then stop yourself from doing that negative action, creating that negative karma. So mindfulness is very, very important in that way, to refrain from or avoid non-virtue, bad karma, and to do what's virtuous, good karma. And the second part of the slide talks about the role that mindfulness plays in the 3 higher trainings. So that might be familiar to some of you, but if some of you don't know what those are, if one of the goals in Buddhism is to attain nirvana, liberation from suffering and the causes of suffering, a state of complete peace. And those who have thought about that and decided, yes, I want to do that. That's what I want. That's where I want to go. That's what I want to attain. There are 3 main practices we need to do to attain nirvana. So that's the meaning of 3 higher trainings. The first is ethics. Ethics is basically refraining from doing harmful things like killing and stealing and lying and so on. And instead of doing harmful things, trying to do positive, virtuous things as much as possible, helping people, being generous, being kind. So that's basically what ethics is all about. So mindfulness, as I mentioned already, is important in ethics so that we remember what is virtuous and what is non-virtue, so that we, live our life within, along those lines. do what's beneficial and avoid what's harmful. And then the second higher training is concentration. So that's training the mind to be able to stay focused on an object that we choose and not let it wander elsewhere. So concentration is a very important quality for spiritual development, for attaining nirvana, for attaining enlightenment. Even in our daily life, if we don't have concentration while you're driving or whatever work you're doing, then there's danger that you might make a mistake, hurt yourself, hurt others, and so on. So it's quite a valuable tool. So for concentration, again, we need mindfulness, because it's mindfulness that enables us to keep our mind focused on our meditation object, or if you're driving, focus on your driving and not look out the window at what's going on, talk on your phone and so on, because that can be very dangerous. So mindfulness is what enables us to stay concentrated. And the third higher training is wisdom, which is the most important one. Wisdom means understanding the way things exist, seeing things in a correct way as they really are, rather than in mistaken ways, which is where we're at. According to Buddhism, our basic problem is we are confused about things. We don't see things correctly. Whoops. And that includes our own self, our own sense of I, me, myself, who I am, what I am. We think we know ourselves, we think we understand ourselves, but we actually don't. We have mistaken ideas about ourselves, our own existence, that need to be straightened out, cleared up, and also about other people and other beings, the way that we see them, how we think they exist. We also have errors in our views about others, and also about the world and our life and everything. So there's certain mistaken ideas or misconceptions that we have about things, and that's really why we suffer, because I don't know myself properly. I think I exist in a way that I don't. And then I tend to be very focused on myself. I am so important. I am the center of the universe. Everything revolves around me. And then that becomes my way of viewing everybody else. Oh, these are nice people because they smile at me and they treat me well and they do what I like, make me feel good. So they're my friends. I like them. I want to keep them near as much as I can. And those people over there, oh, I don't like them. I don't like what they're doing, and they're not nice to me, and they don't do what I want. And so they're, I'm going to avoid them or maybe be nasty to them or whatever. So attachment and aversion are the two main emotions, afflictive emotions that we have. And they arise basically from the sense of self and self-centeredness. And then everything else, also the way we view other things, what's happening in the government, what's happening in the world, what's happening with our neighbors, and so on. So we see everything from this viewpoint of I, me, myself. And this is how we get into trouble. We get emotionally afflicted, and then we may act out these emotions and do things that are unwholesome, maybe even illegal, and end up in prison. So we get ourselves into a lot of trouble, a lot of suffering. So yeah, Buddhism says our basic problem is ignorance or confusion about the way things exist. So wisdom is the direct opposite of that. It's the antidote to ignorance. It's what clears up ignorance and confusion. It's understanding things correctly as they are. So this is really, really important. You notice you have a statue here of Manjushri, the statue here on my left. Manjushri is the Buddha of wisdom, and he's shown holding a sword. He's not going to chop anyone's head off. It's a sword of wisdom that cuts through ignorance and confusion. And in his other hand, he holds a text that symbolizes, the wisdom we're trying to develop. We need to first study to learn and think about and gain a correct intellectual understanding of the way things exist. and then meditate on that and gradually clear up our confusion and generate correct ways of seeing things. So wisdom is very, very important. And so of these 3 higher trainings, wisdom is the most important one. But to be able to generate wisdom, we need concentration. If we can't concentrate our mind, if our mind is just all over the place, then it'll be very difficult to see into the nature of things and clear away misconceptions and see things as they are. So concentration is needed for wisdom. And then ethics is needed for concentration. Because if we don't have a good understanding of ethics and a good practice of ethics, then we can be very careless, reckless about what we do. We just do whatever we feel like doing. And then when we sit down and meditate, our mind is going to be quite disturbed. Thinking about all the people we've hurt and all the bad things we've done and feeling a lot of regret and guilt and, oh, why did I do that? And so there's going to be a lot more disturbing thoughts and emotions in our mind, making it difficult to concentrate. So that's why ethics is the first step. Very, very important to live ethically, do what's good, avoid what's bad as much as we can. And that will enable our mind to be more calm when we do sit down and meditate, and we'll be able to develop concentration. And then with better concentration, we'll be able to focus on things and see their nature, how they exist. So mindfulness is important for all of these 3, for the practice of ethics, to remember what's right and wrong, what should be practiced, what should be avoided. Keep that in mind, not forget. Concentration, to be able to stay on the object. And then for wisdom, mindfulness is needed to be able to keep our mind focused on an object while there's some analysis going on, like, how does this object exist? How do I see it? And do I see it correctly or not? Maybe I'm seeing it incorrectly. And we bring in what we've learned from the Buddha's teachings and apply that. And so there's some, analysis, investigation going on. But mindfulness is needed to kind of hold the object so that we can do that kind of investigation. So that's just briefly the role of mindfulness, why mindfulness is so important in the practice of Buddhism and the development of our potential for these higher states of mind. Okay, so then the 4 establishments of mindfulness. So this is a somewhat different topic, establishments of mindfulness. And there's different terms used for these. One is close placements of mindfulness. So if you're reading different books, different texts, you might encounter that term, close placements of mindfulness. Foundations of mindfulness is another one. So it's just different translators will choose different terms, but we're going to just use establishments of mindfulness. And so these involve using mindfulness in particular ways, mainly with regard to 4 objects. So the 4 objects are the body, feelings, minds, and phenomena. Phenomena can mean different things. One example of phenomena are mental factors. So I'll talk more about that later. But anyway, within Buddhism, the Buddha explained what we are, like each one of us, as being made up of various parts, various components, various factors. You may have heard of the 5 aggregates. So this is, even before the Buddha, I think there was already that concept of a person being made up of 5 aggregates. The first aggregate is called the form aggregate, which refers to our body, this physical body. And then the other 4 aggregates are all aspects of our mind. And so feelings, number 2 on the list, this is our mind. It's part of our mind. Our mind, in Buddhism, mind is very complex. It's explained as having many different facets, many different parts, not just one thing that's always there and always the same, but it's made up of different parts, different components, and it's changing all the time. So feelings is one aspect of the mind, and it's a very important one. The word feeling, the way it's used in Buddhism, isn't quite the same as emotions. In English, we tend to use feelings and emotions interchangeably, and there's many, many different kinds of emotions. But feelings in Buddhism is talking about three very basic kind of initial reactions that we have whenever we encounter an object. So, for example, when we see an object, one way in which we contact an object is visually. I happen to be very visually oriented. I look at things. I really like to look at things. Some other people may be more in tune with sounds or with smells or whatever. But anyway, visual objects. So whenever we see an object with our eyes, there's a feeling that accompanies that. It happens instantly. And there's just three types of feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. So, like when I walked in here tonight, I had a very pleasant feeling seeing this beautiful room and the beautiful objects on the altar and so on, and beautiful people. So it was mostly pleasant feelings that happened in my mind. Somebody else might walk in here and have an unpleasant feeling. Do you think that's possible? Maybe somebody who's belongs to a particular religion that feels our religion is the only one that is right. And what are all these objects? Oh, these, maybe that's from the devil, from Satan. I don't know. Okay. So they may have a very unpleasant feeling if they walk into this room. Yeah. On the other hand, if we were to go to a certain place, like maybe the dump, where there's just big piles of trash and broken machines, and yeah, not very pleasant, right? I don't feel pleasant when I go to the dump. Not beautiful things to look at. So anyway, those are the two main types of feelings. When we see something we find attractive, we have a pleasant feeling. When we see something we find unattractive, we have an unpleasant feeling. And then there's a third feeling, which is neutral, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. And that, I think that's more difficult to notice, but I tend to think of when you're just looking at a plain wall, especially if it has no color, if it's just white. Well, white is a color, but anyway, there's no particular color there. Just looking at a very plain wall, probably a neutral feeling. At least that's what, I would feel. Not really pleasant, not really unpleasant, but somewhere in between. So with every single one of our perceptions, everything we see, everything we hear, everything we smell, taste, and feel with our body, is one of those three feelings. And they happen really fast, and we may not always notice them. Maybe it's subconscious or subliminal. But the reason feelings is so important is because if we're not careful, not mindful, pleasant feelings lead to attachment, grasping, craving. Ah, I like that. I want that. I want more of that. I want to hang on to that. So that's one of the disturbing emotions or negative emotions, afflicted emotions in Buddhism, that keeps us stuck in an unenlightened state. So it's something we need to overcome. And then if we have an unpleasant feeling, it usually leads to aversion or dislike or even anger or even hatred or even aggressiveness, wanting to do something aggressive, harm, destroy, get rid of. So we probably know that one very well. It's very negative and leads to horrible things in the world, war and violence and so much suffering. And neutral feeling doesn't lead to either of those states of mind, but it just perpetuates our ignorance, our confusion. We just kind of feel blah. We don't really do anything to try to wake ourselves up, get ourselves out of confusion. We just keep going the way we are. And so for ordinary unenlightened beings, neutral feelings are also problematic. So it's really important in the Buddha's teachings to notice feelings, to become aware of feelings, and try to not let them develop further into the attachment and aversion and perpetuate ignorance. So I'll talk more about that next week. Tonight I thought to talk more about the first one, the body. And then minds and phenomena. Yeah, I'll deal with those later. Sorry, I keep hitting this thing. But anyway, the Buddhist explanation. Oh yeah, I was talking about the 5 aggregates. So the form and then feelings is aggregate number 2. And then the third aggregate is discriminations, which is another mental factor. It's actually present all the time. And it's what enables our mind to distinguish one thing from another. So we can tell one color from another, for example, or one type of animal from another, or one person from another. So that's a really important mental factor as well, to be able to distinguish things and know how to relate to things in different ways. And then the fourth aggregate is called, sometimes it's called compositional factors, or I don't know, there's different names for it, but it's kind of a grab bag. It's kind of, whatever doesn't fit into the other 4 aggregates goes into that one. So that includes lots of mental factors, different mental factors. Some of them are negative or afflicted, like anger, attachment, and so on. Some of them are positive, like love and compassion. And some of them are just neutral. So we have many different of these mental factors or facets of our mind. And then the last aggregate, the 6th one, is called consciousness. And that includes just the bare perceptions, experiences that we have, like seeing and hearing and smelling and tasting and feeling sensations with our body. And then we also have a 6th consciousness, which is our mental consciousness. And that includes our thoughts, our dreams, our memories. So that's another way that we know things. Anyway, Buddhism is quite complex in the way it explains things, but it's important because this is what we are. This is what makes us up. Each one of us is a combination of these 5 things, these 5 aggregates. You can actually synthesize, if you want a simpler version, you can just say 2 things, body and mind. We are a body and a mind. But each of those is made up of many different things, many different parts. And do we know our body? Do we understand our body? Do we see our body and our mind correctly as they are? Do we have healthy and realistic, beneficial attitudes about our body and our mind, and about ourselves, our I? So maybe not. And that's the reason for doing this practice, is to look at our body and our mind more closely, more carefully, understand them, and clear up misconceptions that we have and see them more correctly. So the last bullet point there says, you focus with mindfulness to investigate the specific and general characteristics of these 4 objects. So that's the meaning of the practice of the 4 establishments of mindfulness. You have these 4 objects. You don't do all 4 at once. You have to do one at a time. And then maybe eventually you can get to where you can do all four. But in the beginning, you train one at a time. And you use mindfulness, which is able to keep the mind focused on its object. And then you investigate these four objects to understand their characteristics. And so the next slide explains the specific and general characteristics. So the specific characteristics means each of these four objects has its own unique characteristic. So the first object, the body, the specific characteristic is the impurity of the body. This is a topic a lot of people have resistance to. We don't like to hear about it. We don't like to think about it. We may even deny it. No, my body is not impure. My body is pure. I'll tell you a funny story. Just popped up in my mind. Many, many years ago, I was staying in one Buddhist center in England. And it was a big place, many people, lots of activities. And I was just walking through the hall one day, and there was a phone sitting in the hallway, and a phone rang. There's nobody around. So I thought, well, maybe I should pick it up. So I picked up the phone, and on the other end was a woman who lived in a nearby town. And she said she had visited the center and bought a book, a small book about Buddhism, and she took it home and she was reading this book. And she got so upset because in this book, there was something about, it was about birth. I don't know if you've heard this before, but in Buddhism, it said that birth is very painful. The child, going through the process of being in the womb and then coming out of the womb, it's not a pleasant experience. It's a painful experience. It's an unpleasant experience. And one of the traditional explanations, I hope nobody's offended by this, but it's in the teaching. It says that being in the womb is very unpleasant because there's a lot of dirty substances in the womb. And this woman, she said, I want you to know my womb is not dirty. I take a bath every day. And I didn't know what to say, but anyway, that was one case of somebody who was upset by the idea of the body being impure. I experienced it myself. I've experienced resistance to this idea of the body being impure. So we need to look at that. We need to look at our own ideas about our body and look at what the Buddha said, and then just check, what do you think about this? And if you have resistance to this, then look at that. Why is that? I will talk more about that later, and we'll do some meditation on it. But the reason for this is because we tend to be, what's the word I wanted to say? We tend to have like fantasies, hallucinations about the body. And these are very much fed by the media and by society and so on. We're constantly confronted with images of exquisitely beautiful bodies. The young men and women who are modeling clothes or makeup or whatever. And my understanding is that they use Photoshop. Actually, they make these bodies look much better than they really are. But this is kind of presented to us as an ideal. And then, we want to look like that too. We want to live up to that ideal. And there's probably a lot of suffering, a lot of people, even the models themselves, what I've heard, the models and the film stars themselves are not happy with their bodies. They feel they can see their bodies better than other people can. And they feel, I'm really not that perfect. I have this wrong, that wrong. And so they're probably dissatisfied as well with their bodies. But yeah, there's this push to try to have this perfect body, this exquisitely beautiful, perfect body. Even if you did have such a body, how long would it remain that way? So our old friend, impermanence. Anyway, I'll talk a bit more about that. Do a meditation on that later. So anyway, that's the characteristic of the body. And then for feelings, the second one, the unsatisfactory nature of feelings. So I'm using the word unsatisfactory. It's actually dukkha, Sanskrit or Pali word dukkha, which is often translated as suffering. But suffering isn't such an ideal word because it usually connotes something really awful, like war or cancer or something. But the word dukkha can refer to those kinds of problems. They can also just refer to just our simple, ordinary, everyday problems, aches and pains in our body, aging, and mental unhappiness, dissatisfaction, restlessness, boredom. So even minor, relatively minor problems like those are types of dukkha. So unsatisfactory may be a better term for that. So feelings are unsatisfactory. One reason is they don't last. You have a pleasant feeling and you want to hang on to that pleasant feeling. You don't want it to go away, but sooner or later it is going to go away. Unpleasant feelings are definitely unsatisfactory. You don't want those. You want them to go away, but they don't go away as fast as you would like. And neutral feelings, well, they're not really that great, but they're better than suffering. So anyway, if you look carefully at feelings, you can see that they're not really that satisfying. And then the third one, the impermanence of the mind. So that means our mind is impermanent. It's changing all the time, every minute, every second. It doesn't stay the same. It's its nature. And our body is also impermanent. Our feelings are also impermanent, but it's specifically focusing on the impermanence of the mind here. And the fourth is selflessness of phenomena. So that means phenomena lack a self. Phenomena, the word phenomena, actually, in one way, it refers to everything. Whatever exists is a phenomenon. So all phenomena are empty of a certain type of self that we normally believe in. Like I was talking before, we have a sense of a real I somewhere inside of us, even though we don't really know what it is, how it exists, but it feels like it's there. We believe in it. The Buddhism says we should look at our sense of self and see if it exists or not. What do we think? And what we'll discover if we follow the Buddha's guidance is there isn't such a self. That type of self isn't there, cannot be found. So those are the specific characteristics we try to understand with each object. And then there's general characteristics which apply to all four objects. So they are impermanence, unsatisfactory, empty, and selfless. So like I say, we don't have time to go into all of these. I'll just focus on a few. And so the next slide, tonight we'll look more carefully at the body, mindfulness of the body. So in the book I mentioned, which is called Following the Buddha's Footsteps, it says, we are embodied beings, and much of our lives revolves around our bodies. We do spend a lot of time dealing with our bodies in different ways, taking care of them, feeding them, resting them, exercising them, entertaining them. So we spend a lot of time taking care of our bodies. And also, most people have a job, and that means spending many hours each day working. And why do we need to work? It comes back to the body. We need food. We need a place to store our body, to shelter for our body. We need medicine. We need all these things for our body. So if you think about how much time you spend each day, either directly or indirectly, caring for your body, it's a lot. And this is why the body is the first of the four objects to be examined. Establishing mindfulness on the body brings a clear understanding of what the body is and what it means to have a body. And so this practice, there's different ways. I'll go through these just briefly, different ways of practicing mindfulness of the body, but it gives us a chance to check our attitudes about our body and see if they're realistic or not, see if they're helpful or not. So some people are quite obsessed with their body in the sense of wanting to look a certain way and spending a lot of time, a lot of energy trying to get their body to be a certain way. And again, the media and society tend to support this. And I was thinking today about how, for many people, when you go to a party or you go to a meeting or even going to church, you yourself and also many of the other people there might spend quite a bit of time looking at each other and assessing each other, like how this person looks today, what they're wearing, their makeup, their hair, and so on. And that can lead to criticalness or admiration or jealousy. So some disturbing emotions can come up about that. And other people have very different attitudes about bodies. They may hate their bodies. They may have aversion for their bodies, or at least certain parts of their bodies. They don't like the way they look. Maybe they even feel, why do I have to have this body? It's horrible. I want to get rid of it. And that's also a kind of obsession. Having hatred, aversion towards your body you're still obsessed with it in a negative way. So those two attitudes, being obsessed in the sense of wanting to look great, and maybe you're thinking you do look great, or hating your body, maybe even wanting to get rid of it, those are kind of two extremes, and they're not healthy at all. They lead to a lot of suffering, a lot of problems. And there's this one idea that they mention sometimes in Tibetan Buddhism, and I know about other traditions of Buddhism, but this idea that our body is like a guest house. There's this expression, the guest house of the body. And the meaning of that is tied in with rebirth or reincarnation. Our mind, goes from one life to another, one body to another. And it will live in one body for 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years, whatever. And then it will leave and go to another body. So in that sense, the body is like a guest house. It's a temporary dwelling place for the mind in its journey from one life to another. And I don't know, I really like that idea, because if you think about when you're traveling, you stay in a hotel for one night or 2 nights or 3 nights, you're not going to get all obsessed with the hotel room and want to start repainting the walls and changing the curtains and the light fixtures. And because you're going to be leaving after a day or two. So you just, you deal with it to the best of your ability, and then you leave. So in a similar way, that ideal attitude in Buddhism with the body is, of course, we need to take care of it. We keep it healthy, we keep it fed, keep it comfortable, but not get overly obsessed with it, either with attachment or with aversion. See it as like a vehicle, situation that enables me to live this life and practice the Dharma, follow the spiritual path, benefit others, do things for others, but no need to get all obsessed about how it looks or how it doesn't look. Does that make sense? So just planting a seed in your mind to think about that idea. So the ideal attitude is to have a healthy attitude about the body, taking care of it, using it for what is good, what is beneficial, but not being overly attached, because anyway, we're going to leave it one day, anytime. We don't know when that's going to happen, but sooner or later there will come the time to leave this body behind. So anyway, just briefly, there's different ways of practicing mindfulness of the body, breathing meditation. So in the sutra where the Buddha taught these 4 establishments of mindfulness, that's where he started. Very simple. Sit down and focus on your breathing and just be aware of your breath coming in and going out. So we probably all encountered that practice. That really helps to calm down the mind. And then the second is bodily postures. So that means just being aware of, they mentioned 4 general postures: sitting, standing, walking, and lying down. So I think all day long our body is in one of those positions, unless you're doing a headstand in the yoga class. That's just another kind of standing. But anyway, those are the 4 main positions that our body is in all day long. So the Buddha said, just be aware where your body is. What is the position of your body? And number 3 is bodily activities. So sometimes we're doing more complex things, typing on a computer, talking on the phone, making something with wood, or whatever. So whatever activities you are doing, ideally, you just try to be aware of those things. Be aware of what your body's doing. And then number 4 is parts of the body. So the Buddha mentioned 32 parts. There's more than that, but those are the main parts. And this meditation involves just contemplate. You learn those parts of the body and you contemplate them. You learn what they look like, where they are, what the function is, and just get really familiar. This is quite a powerful practice, powerful meditation, because you also contemplate that these are subject to change, to decay, to sickness, and eventual death. All these parts of the body are going to stop functioning at some point, and this body will not last any longer. So it really helps us overcome attachment to our body as well as aversion to our body. And also there's a tendency to identify with our body. And we tend to feel this is me. And that can lead to a lot of problems as well. Somebody gives you a dirty look or makes some nasty comment about your body, you can get incensed. Or if they make a compliment about your body, you're over the moon. So it can lead to a lot of afflicted emotions and suffering and problems. So just learning to be less identified with the body, less attached to the body, kind of eases those types of suffering, as well as the sufferings that just come as our body gets older, gets sick, and eventually faces death, dying. Number 5 is the elements. So this is an Asian system, but I think it also existed in ancient Greece, some Western cultures as well. They talk about 4 elements: earth, water, fire, and wind. Every physical phenomenon is made up of those. And that's another, it's kind of also a way of meditating on the parts of the body, just getting to understand that our body is made up of these parts and they're impermanent, they're changing all the time, coming and going. And so again, it helps to decrease attachment to the body. And then number 6, corpses. What? So you may have heard that at the time of the Buddha, his disciples were would go and sit in cemeteries. But cemeteries are not like Western cemeteries, which are nice and neat, and they have grass and flowers and that kind of thing. Bodies were just put out in the open and left for animals to eat, vultures and lions or foxes or whatever. And so you have bodies in various stages of decomposition and being torn up and so on. And so this kind of practice is only meant for those who are quite familiar with the other practices, who've spent a lot of time doing the other ones and are quite mature and spiritually and emotionally stable. This is not an easy one. But think about how just as these bodies are decomposing and being eaten by other creatures, the same will happen to my body one day. So that really helps to decrease attachment and identification with the body. So we're not going to do that, don't worry. But it's there if you're interested. So I thought we're kind of running out of time, but I thought we could do a little bit of meditation on the skin. This is one of the 32 parts of the body that Buddha mentioned. So these are some photos of the skin. The first is just kind of a close-up shot of skin. The second one has a hole in it. That's a needle placed in the skin where a needle has gone in, and it's an electron microscope. So it's like super powerful, super blown up. I don't know if they're not so clear, but the original photos, the skin doesn't look that beautiful. Like when you see especially young people, child or a teenager or someone in their 20s, skin can look so beautiful, soft and smooth. But when you look really, really close to skin, like the one on the bottom, it's a through electron microscope. So that shows the surface of the skin on the top and then what's underneath the skin. So when you look at those pictures, do you find them beautiful? So would you say, oh, skin is so beautiful. So when you look from far away, you don't look carefully. Skin can look beautiful, but when you look really carefully, really closely at skin, and you think about it, and you see it quite differently. And so we do this with each of the parts of the body, and it really helps to overcome attachment and fantasies about the body. And there's some interesting information about skin that I came across. We have 3 million bacteria in every square inch of our skin. And our body sheds 600,000 bits of skin every hour. That means it's dead skin falling off. 10,000 bits a minute. And that's where dust comes from. I always wondered about that. Like even in the wintertime, you have your windows closed, there's still dust everywhere. Have you noticed that? You have to dust things. So most of that dust is our dead skin. Isn't that romantic? So one explanation of the meditation that I found that was really helpful in Bhante Gunaratana, a Theravada teacher, he said it's good to contemplate, the value of skin. I mean, skin definitely plays an important role. If we didn't have skin, our body would be much more vulnerable to injury and illness and so on. So it does protect us. It has its benefit, its value. But on the other hand, there's so many different diseases that can happen with the skin. Many, many different diseases that can be painful, that can be itchy, that can be uncomfortable, can make you feel really awful as well. So there's both sides. There's the good side about skin, but the bad side. And he also mentioned how, skin can be a cause of suffering in other ways. Like people tend to judge others according to the color of their skin. I mean, nobody chooses what color of skin they have. right? Or what texture their skin is. Nobody gets to choose that. You just, other factors, genes and other factors that determine what your skin looks like. And yet there you are with the skin, and people can judge you for that. And lots of suffering happens because of that. So contemplating these kind of both sides helps to ease attachment and aversion and be able to see things like our skin in a better way. So we're kind of running out of time. Better let's just do a short meditation to get a feeling for this kind of practice of parts of the body. So let yourself relax physically and mentally. Put aside any other thoughts you may have in your mind. And remember the altruistic intention you had at the beginning of the session to benefit others as much as possible and not harm them, and benefit yourself as well. Do what will bring yourself happiness and free yourself from suffering. Now feel your body and be aware that your body isn't just one whole solid thing, that it's a collection of many, many different things, many different parts. And each of these parts is subject to change. It's impermanent. Even right now, as we're sitting here, sitting still, there's changes happening in every single part of our body. So focus on your skin. Skin is important. It's helpful for us to protect ourselves from the elements, sun, cold, wind, rain, snow, protecting us from harm. But it has its downside. We can develop ailments, illnesses with our skin, which can be painful or just very unpleasant, very uncomfortable. And however beautiful our skin may be at a certain time in our life, it won't stay that way. It's wrinkled, dry, age spots appear, discoloration. So see if you can accept that inevitability, be comfortable with it. It happens to everybody, you're not the only one. And if you can accept it, your mind will be more at ease when these changes occur. Understand that your skin is not you. It's not who you are. It's just a part of you, part of your body. And there will come a time when you leave this body. The mind will separate from this body and travel on. So does it make sense to be attached, clean, identify with this body, with our skin and the other parts of the body? Imagine how it would be if you could see your body as that quote I mentioned earlier, the body being like a guest house for your mind. You just abide in for a period of time and then you leave. So you don't need to be obsessed with it, attached to it, or hating it. Just take care of it, but be ready to separate from it when the time comes. Okay, so we've actually come to the end of our time. There's 2 minutes left. So I don't know if anyone has a burning question you would like to ask.
I'll speak that.
You want to use this one?
My question is that my Mahayana, familiarity with Mahayana training, mindfulness is almost by itself kind of usefulness without the visual and introspection. And I'm wondering,
Without the what?
the vision introspection.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm wondering if this is the difference between Theravada and Mahayana.
No, I didn't mention, yeah. I didn't mention that particular mental factor. Sometimes it's called vigilance or introspective awareness. In the Pali tradition, it's called clear comprehension. So that is definitely important, essential part of the practice. It's because there's so many things to talk about, so I had to pick and choose. But yes, that's definitely needed in the practice of mindfulness, practice of clear comprehension. And it plays different roles. One role is like a spy or like a security guard, just to watch what you're doing, what's going on in your mind, what's going on in your body, and be able to detect if you're going off in the wrong direction, or you're, getting angry or getting caught up in attachment. So it's that particular mental factor, vigilance or introspective awareness, that monitors what's going on and says, no, you're not, you shouldn't be doing that, come back. So definitely that is needed. I just didn't have time to mention it. It's also quite complex, and it seems that in different scriptures and different traditions, it's explained differently. So it's actually I guess we could just say it's multifunctional, multifaceted. But I guess we could say, like when we're doing meditation on breathing, we start off focusing on the breath, and then at a certain point, the mind wanders away and maybe gets caught up in a fantasy or gets starts thinking about somebody you're angry at, are you going to get back at that person? So it would be that mental fact, the visions that notices, oh, this shouldn't be going on, I shouldn't be doing this, and then brings you back to your object. So that's how we can understand its function, its purpose, and its importance. Anyone else? If you do have questions, we'll continue next week, so you can bring them up next week. I'll try to live more time than not spend all the time talking. There's so much to share. So we'll stop here and dedicate merit, the positive energy that we have created by coming together and having a positive motivation, altruistic motivation for being here. And just making the effort to listen and learn and understand and engage with this material and hopefully aspire to practice it. So we've definitely created some positive energy, merit. And so we close by sharing that merit with all other living beings, wishing them to have happiness, to encounter spiritual teachers and teachings and follow the path, and eventually become free of suffering and causes of suffering, and eventually reach full enlightenment. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel, bodhicitta, that has not arisen, arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And then praying for the long lives of our precious teachers, the incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, wish-fulfilling, wish-granting jewel, source of every benefit and happiness in this world. May you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the skewer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three sublime ones, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live. Thank you.